The rattling of the stage-coach wheels against the dusty trail faded as Catherine Jenkins peered through the window at her new home. Snowflake, Arizona Territory, 1885, little more than a cluster of wooden buildings straddling the main street, backed by the majestic white mountains in the distance. 23 years old and fresh from Teachers College in Boston, Catherine clutched her weathered copy of McGuffey's Reader to her chest as the driver called the horses to a halt. "Snowflake, miss," the driver announced, his voice gruff from trail dust. "End of the line for you." Catherine smoothed her navy traveling dress, adjusted her small hat, and gathered her courage along with her carpetbag. The journey had been long train from Boston to Holbrook, then this bone-jarring stage coach for the final stretch. But she had come to fulfill a purpose, to be the schoolteacher this frontier town desperately needed. "Thank you," she said, accepting the driver's calloused hand as she stepped down onto Arizona soil for the first time. The late September heat was dry and intense, nothing like the humid warmth of Massachusetts. Mayor Thornton had described Snowflake as growing with promise, but Catherine saw a raw frontier town still in its infancy. The Mercantile, a saloon, a small church, and scattered homes stretched along the main street. Children played in the dirt, stopping to stare at the newcomer in her Eastern clothes. "Miss Jenkins," a portly man with a thick mustache approached, extending his hand. "Mayor William Thornton." "We're mighty pleased you've arrived safely," Catherine smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mayor. I'm eager to begin my duties." "Excellent, excellent. The town council has prepared the schoolhouse such as it is, and Mrs. Thornton has a room ready for you at our home until more permanent arrangements can be made." As they walked, the mayor pointed out the town's establishments: Smith's Mercantile, the Silver Dollar Saloon, the small sheriff's office, and finally, at the far end of town, a modest wooden structure with a bell mounted on a post outside. "Your schoolhouse, Miss Jenkins." 15 children ranging from 6 to 16. Some ride in from ranches miles away, so attendance can be unpredictable during bad weather or roundup time. Catherine approached the building, noting its fresh whitewash but simple construction. A single room with windows along both sides, wooden benches and desks waiting for pupils. "It's perfect," she said, though it was far from the brick schoolhouse she'd trained in, but it had possibility, and that was enough. "School begins Monday," Mayor Thornton said. "That gives you 3 days to settle in and prepare." After dinner at the mayor's home that evening, where she met his wife Harriet and their 3 children, Catherine sat in her small but comfortable room and wrote in her journal. September 17, 1885 arrived in Snowflake today. "The town is smaller than I imagined, but the people seem welcoming. I am their only schoolteacher, a responsibility I do not take lightly. These children deserve education, regardless of where they live. I pray I am equal to the task before me." Monday morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the schoolhouse windows. Catherine rang the bell at precisely 8 o'clock, her heart pounding as she watched children approach from all directions, some walking from town, others riding ponies from outlying ranches. "Good morning," she greeted each one at the door, memorizing faces and names as they entered. "I'm Miss Jenkins, your teacher." The children filed in, curious, shy, bold, and wary in equal measure. By 5 minutes past 8, 14 students sat before her, ranging from little Emma Miller with her blonde braids to tall, lanky Thomas Wilson, who looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. "Welcome," Catherine began, writing her name on the blackboard in her precise script. "I'm very pleased to meet all of you. We have much to learn together this year." The morning proceeded with assessments to determine each child's level of learning. Some could read fluently, others struggled with basic letters. Mathematics skills varied widely. By noon, Catherine had a clearer picture of the challenge before her and the rewarding work to come. As the children ate their packed lunches outside under the cottonwood tree, Sheriff Dan Morgan stopped by, tipping his hat. "Miss Jenkins, just wanted to welcome you properly to Snowflake. Anything you need, my office is just down the street." "Thank you, Sheriff. The children mentioned you sometimes speak to them about the law." "Yes, madam. Figure they ought to know right from wrong early on." He looked toward the children. "Good bunch of youngsters, mostly. Though I hear the Keller boys from the North Ranch might be joining soon. They can be spirited." The afternoon session focused on geography, with Catherine showing the children a map of the United States, many seeing for the first time how their territory fit into the larger nation. As school ended and the children dispersed, Catherine noticed a tall figure on horseback watching from a distance a man in dusty clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. When she looked again, he was gone. The first week passed in a blur of lessons, organization, and learning the rhythms of Snowflake. Catherine established routines, assigned reading levels, and began to connect with each child. By Friday, she felt confident enough to assign her first essays to the older students and reading practice to the younger ones. Saturday morning, Catherine ventured to Smith's Mercantile to purchase supplies. The store was busier than she expected, filled with townspeople and ranch hands stocking up for the week. "Miss Jenkins," Mr. Smith called from behind the counter. "What can I help you with today?" "I need paper, pencils, and perhaps some colored chalks if you have them," she replied, navigating between two cowboys examining saddle blankets. As she waited for Mr. Smith to gather her items, Catherine noticed a tall man at the far counter, his broad shoulders and strong hands marking him as someone who worked with cattle. He wore simple clothes, faded blue shirt, worn denim, and boots that had seen many trails. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and when he turned slightly, she caught a glimpse of a strong profile and days-old stubble. "That's Zachariah Keller," Mrs. Smith whispered, appearing beside Catherine. "Owns the North Star Ranch about 10 miles out, keeps to himself mostly." Before Catherine could respond, the rancher finished his business and turned to leave. Their eyes met briefly across the store, his startling blue against sun-darkened skin. He nodded once politely, then headed for the door. "He has 2 brothers," Mrs. Smith continued. "They've got 3 little ones between them who should be in your school, but they haven't sent them yet. Proud family, the Kellers." Catherine considered this information as she paid for her supplies. "Perhaps I should visit their ranch, speak to them about the importance of education for the children." Mrs. Smith's eyes widened. "That's not usually done, miss. Men like the Kellers come to town when they're ready." But Catherine had not come all the way from Boston to wait for reluctant families to decide education was worthwhile. "Do you know which direction their ranch lies?" Monday afternoon after school, Catherine borrowed a gentle mare named Penny from the mayor, and with directions from Sheriff Morgan, set out for the North Star Ranch. The sheriff had seemed concerned about her traveling alone, but recognized her determination. "If you're not back by sundown, I'll come looking," he'd said firmly. The trail wound through scrubby pine and juniper, occasionally offering glimpses of the mountains. After an hour's ride, she crested a hill and saw the ranch spread before her, a substantial log home, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and smoke curled from the chimney. As she approached, a dog began barking, and a young boy of about 9 appeared from behind the barn, watching curiously as she rode in. When she reached the yard, the front door opened, and Zachariah Keller stepped onto the porch, his expression guarded. "Hello," Catherine called, reining Penny to a stop. "Mr. Keller, I'm Catherine Jenkins, the schoolteacher from Snowflake." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once in acknowledgement. The boy had edged closer, and now Catherine could see family resemblance in his features. "You must be one of the Keller children," she said warmly. "I haven't seen you in school yet." The boy glanced at his uncle, then back at Catherine. "I'm James, that's my Uncle Zach." Catherine dismounted, holding Penny's reins. "Is your father home?" "I'd like to speak with him about your education." James looked uncomfortable. "Pa's out with the herd, won't be back till dark." Zachariah Keller descended the porch steps and approached. He was even taller up close, towering over Catherine's 5'4" frame. He made a series of gestures with his hands, and Catherine realized with surprise that he was using sign language, something she had seen only once before, when a deaf lecturer had visited her teacher's college. James interpreted. "Uncle Zach wants to know why you came all this way." Catherine addressed Zachariah directly, maintaining eye contact. "Mr. Keller, I believe every child deserves an education. I understand you have 3 children here who should be attending school. I came to discuss how we might make that possible." Zachariah's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes. He signed again, more extensively this time. James translated hesitantly. He says the children are needed here, and town is far. I understand the distance is challenging, Catherine responded. But other children come from similar distances. Perhaps they could stay in town during the week. There are families willing to board students. As James relayed her words, a woman emerged from the house, pretty, with dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. I'm Sarah Keller, James's mother, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Please come inside, Miss Jenkins. You must be thirsty after your ride. Zachariah's hands moved again, and though Catherine couldn't understand the signs, his disagreement was clear in his furrowed brow. Now, Zach, Sarah said firmly, the teacher has come all this way. We can at least offer her some hospitality. Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. Two more children appeared, a girl of about 7 and another boy around 11. These are my other children, Sarah explained. Eliza and Thomas. My husband Robert is Zach's younger brother. The eldest brother, Matthew, and his wife live in the smaller house beyond the corrals. As Sarah prepared coffee, Catherine explained the school schedule, the subjects taught, and her belief in education's importance. Zachariah remained by the fireplace, watching intently but offering no comment. The children do need schooling, Sarah admitted. We've taught them what we can, but… She glanced at her brother-in-law. There have been disagreements about sending them to town. Catherine sensed a complex family dynamic at work. Mr. Keller, she said, addressing Zachariah directly again, may I ask why you oppose the children attending school? Sarah interpreted his signs this time. Zach says the world hasn't been kind to those who are different. He worries the children will be treated poorly because their uncle can't speak. Catherine's heart softened at this unexpected vulnerability. Mr. Keller, children are more accepting than adults often give them credit for, and education helps build understanding. Your niece and nephews would never be judged for having a… She searched for the right word, a unique uncle. Zachariah's jaw tightened and he signed again, more forcefully. He says you don't understand, Sarah translated quietly. The last teacher in Hallbrook made an example of him when he was a boy, called him simple-minded because he couldn't speak, though he could read and write some. Said people like him belonged in asylums, not classrooms. Catherine felt a surge of indignation. That teacher was ignorant and cruel. I am neither. I would never judge anyone for things beyond their control, nor allow my students to do so. For the first time, Zachariah's stern expression softened slightly. He signed again. He asks how you'd handle it when the children are teased for having a mute uncle, Sarah said. Catherine considered her answer carefully. I would teach all my students that people communicate in different ways. That intelligence isn't measured by speech, and that respecting differences is as important as reading and arithmetic. The room fell silent. Then Zachariah moved to a desk in the corner, took out paper and pencil, and wrote something. He returned and handed the note to Catherine. In a surprisingly elegant hand, he had written, "The children can come, but I will bring and collect them myself." "Thank you, Mr. Keller," Catherine said, genuinely moved by his concession. "They won't regret it, and neither will you." As Catherine prepared to leave, Sarah pressed a package of freshly baked bread into her hands. "Thank you for coming, Miss Jenkins. Few would have made the effort." Zachariah accompanied Catherine to her horse, lifting her easily into the saddle before she could protest. His hands were strong but gentle, and for a moment their eyes met again. Catherine felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "I'll see the children tomorrow, then?" she asked. He nodded once, then stepped back, watching as she turned Penny toward town. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the schoolhouse early to prepare for her new students. At precisely 7:45, she heard hoofbeats and looked out to see Zachariah Keller riding a large chestnut gelding, with James behind him and the other two children in a small wagon led by a steady-looking mule. The existing students watched curiously as the Keller children entered the schoolhouse. Catherine made introductions, assigning seats and reading materials based on the assessments she'd quickly conducted. "Your uncle will return at 4 o'clock, she assured them. "Until then, you're going to learn wonderful things." Throughout the day, she noticed James occasionally glancing toward the window, perhaps checking whether his uncle had truly left. By afternoon, however, He was engrossed in a geography lesson, pointing out places on the map with newfound confidence. At 4 o'clock precisely, Zachariah appeared in the doorway as the children were gathering their things. His niece Eliza ran to him excitedly, tugging him toward the blackboard to show him her careful letters. Catherine approached as the other students filed out. "They did wonderfully today, Mr. Keller. James has a particular aptitude for mathematics, and Eliza's penmanship is quite good for her age." Zachariah nodded, watching his niece with undisguised affection. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote, "Thomas struggles with reading." Catherine was impressed by his perception. "Yes, the letters seem to confuse him, but we'll work on techniques to help him. Many children face similar challenges." He considered this, then wrote, "Thank you." As October progressed, a routine developed. Each morning, Zachariah would deliver the children to school, acknowledging Catherine with a nod. Each afternoon, he would return, sometimes early enough to observe the final lesson. Catherine began to anticipate these moments, finding herself glancing at the clock as 4 o'clock approached. One afternoon, as a rainstorm threatened, Catherine kept the children inside during lunch. She noticed Thomas struggling with his reading assignment while the others played quiet games. "Would you like some help?" she offered, sitting beside him. He nodded reluctantly. "Uncle Zach tries to help me at home, but I still can't make sense of it." Catherine was surprised. "Your uncle helps you with reading?" "Yes, madam. He reads real good, even if he can't talk. He reads to us every night using his hands to tell the story." This revelation shifted Catherine's understanding of Zachariah Keller. Not only was he literate, but he was actively involved in his niece's and nephew's education. That afternoon, when Zachariah arrived, she asked if he could stay a moment after the children were settled in the wagon. "Mr. Keller," she said when they were alone, "Thomas mentioned you read to them. I'm impressed by your commitment to their learning." He seemed uncomfortable with the praise but wrote in his notebook, "Books were my friends when people were not." The simple sentence revealed more than a lengthy conversation might have. Catherine responded carefully, "I understand isolation. In Boston, I had many acquaintances but few true friends. Books were often my refuge, too." For the first time, she saw something like genuine surprise in his eyes, perhaps at finding common ground with the prim schoolteacher from the east. The storm broke just then, rain hammering the schoolhouse roof. Zachariah glanced outside with concern. "You shouldn't travel in this," Catherine said. "Please, wait until it passes." While the children huddled in the wagon under the schoolhouse's small overhang, Catherine and Zachariah waited inside. The silence between them was oddly comfortable. After a few minutes, he took out his notebook again. "Why did you come to Arizona Territory?" Catherine considered the question. "To teach, obviously, but also to find something I couldn't in Boston, independence, perhaps, purpose." He nodded as if he understood completely, then wrote, "Brave journey for a woman alone." "I don't feel particularly brave," she admitted. "Often I'm terrified I'll fail these children." His next note surprised her. "You won't. You see them as people, not problems." When the rain finally slackened, Zachariah rose to leave. At the door, he hesitated, then wrote one more message. "I can help with Thomas's reading if you'll show me how." "I'd be happy to," Catherine replied, unreasonably pleased by this development. "Perhaps you could come early one afternoon and we could discuss approaches." He nodded, and with a last glance that lingered slightly longer than usual, he left to collect his charges. The following Monday, Zachariah arrived at 3:30, tying his horse at the hitching post while the other children were still engaged in their lessons. Catherine had prepared materials specifically for helping children who struggled with reading. "These are techniques I learned at Teachers College," she explained, showing him exercises that broke words into manageable parts. Zachariah studied everything intently, occasionally making notes of his own. His intelligence was evident in his questions written succinctly but insightfully in his notebook. "You have beautiful handwriting, Mr. Keller," Catherine observed. He looked almost embarrassed as he wrote. "My mother insisted. Said if I couldn't speak, my writing must speak clearly for me." "She was wise," Catherine said softly. These afternoon meetings became weekly occurrences. Soon, they expanded beyond Thomas's reading challenges to discussions of all the children's education. Catherine found herself looking forward to these conversations. impressed by Zachariah's thoughtfulness and his dedication to his family. One Friday in early November, Catherine mentioned a book she was reading, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, only to discover Zachariah had already read it twice. "What did you think of Twain's portrayal of Jim?" he wrote. Their literary discussion extended so long that the children grew restless waiting in the wagon. When Catherine apologized for keeping him, Zachariah smiled the first genuine smile she'd seen from him and wrote, "Worth the wait. Few people to discuss books with here." The following week, when he arrived for their now regular meeting, he brought a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. "My favorite," he wrote. "If you haven't read it." Catherine was touched by the gesture. "I have, but years ago. I'd love to revisit it." "Thank you." As November progressed, Catherine noticed changes in Zachariah beyond their discussions of books and education. He began to dress more carefully when coming to town, his shirt always clean, his hair neatly combed. And though he remained reserved with others, with her, his expressions had become more open, his blue eyes warming when she approached. For her part, Catherine found herself paying more attention to her appearance on days when their meetings were scheduled. She wore her hair in a softer style and once even borrowed a touch of rose-scented perfume from Mrs. Thornton. The mayor's wife noticed, of course. "That silent Keller man seems to come to town more often these days," she observed over breakfast, "and not just to deliver the children." Catherine focused on buttering her toast. "Mr. Keller is very involved in his nieces' and nephews' education. It's commendable." Mrs. Thornton smiled knowingly. "Indeed, though I've noticed it's not the children he watches during the Thanksgiving festival planning meetings." It was true that Zachariah had begun attending town gatherings, something Mrs. Smith from the Mercantile claimed was unprecedented. At these events, he would stand quietly at the edges, but his eyes would inevitably find Catherine across the room. The town was planning a harvest celebration for Thanksgiving, a community dinner, followed by music and dancing in the newly constructed town hall. As the schoolteacher, Catherine was expected to help organize the children's contribution, recitations of poems, and a short play about the first Thanksgiving. One afternoon, as she was rehearsing the children after school, Zachariah arrived early and sat at the back, watching as she directed the young performers. "Very good, Emma. Just remember to speak loudly so everyone can hear you," Catherine instructed. "James, you're next." James stepped forward nervously to recite his poem about autumn. Halfway through, he faltered, forgetting his lines. I can't remember the rest," he admitted, looking mortified. Before Catherine could prompt him, Zachariah stood and signed the next lines. James watched, then smiled with relief. "The leaves are falling, one by one, the summer's green is past and done," he continued confidently after rehearsal. As the other children filed out, Catherine approached Zachariah. "You knew the poem." He wrote in his notebook. "I helped him practice at home." "You're full of surprises, Mr. Keller," she said, smiling up at him. Something changed in his expression, then a softening, a vulnerability that made Catherine's heart beat faster. He wrote again, his pencil hesitating slightly. "Would you call me Zach? Mr. Keller sounds like my father." "Of course, Zach," she said, testing the name. "And you must call me Catherine, at least when we're not in school." He nodded, and for a moment they stood closer than propriety strictly allowed, something unspoken passing between them. The spell was broken when Thomas called from outside, "Uncle Zach, Eliza's untying your horse again." The Thanksgiving celebration arrived on a crisp, clear day. The entire town gathered in the town hall, which had been decorated with autumn leaves, dried corn, and pumpkins. Tables groaned with food: roast turkey, venison, sweet potatoes, pies of every description. Catherine sat with the mayor's family, occasionally glancing toward the Keller table, where Zach sat with his brothers and their families. Once she caught his eye, and he offered a small smile that warmed her more than the hot cider in her cup. After dinner came the children's performance. Catherine watched proudly as they recited their poems and enacted their play, all the practice sessions paying off in a nearly flawless presentation. When James delivered his poem perfectly, Zach's hands moved in subtle signs of approval from his seat. Then came the music and dancing. Mr. Wilson played fiddle while Mr. Jenkins, no relation to Catherine, accompanied on harmonica. Couples took to the floor for lively reels and jigs. Catherine stood watching, clapping in time with the music, when she felt a presence beside her. Zach held out his notebook. I can't ask properly, but would you dance? She looked up in surprise. You dance? He shrugged, a hint of mischief in his eyes as he wrote. Poorly but with enthusiasm. Catherine laughed. Then I'd be honored. He led her to the floor just as a waltz began. His hand at her waist was strong and sure, his steps surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. As they moved together, Catherine was acutely aware of the warmth of his hand holding hers, the solid presence of him guiding her through the turns. You dance very well for someone who claims to do it poorly, she said as they circled the floor, his eyes crinkled at the corners, and though he couldn't respond verbally, his slight tightening of his hand at her waist spoke volumes. From across the room, Catherine noticed Mrs. Thornton watching with interest, whispering to the mayor. Other townspeople, too, seemed to take note of the schoolteacher dancing with the silent rancher. When the music ended, Zach led her back to the edge of the floor, reluctantly releasing her hand. He wrote quickly, "Thank you. Best dance of my life." The simple sincerity of his words touched Catherine deeply. Mine too, she admitted. They shared 2 more dances that evening, between which Catherine fulfilled her social obligations by dancing with the mayor, Sheriff Morgan, and several other townsmen. But her eyes kept finding Zach, who watched her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. As the celebration wound down, Catherine stepped outside for a breath of cool air. The night was clear, stars brilliant above the small town. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Zach. He came to stand beside her, looking up at the stars. "They're so much brighter here than in Boston," she said softly. "Sometimes I feel I could reach up and touch them." Zach took out his notebook, writing by the light spilling from the town hall windows. "They remind me how small our troubles are. Is that why you watch them so often?" When he looked at her questioningly, she added, "James mentioned you often sit outside at night, looking at the stars." He nodded, then wrote, "When words fail, stars speak." The poetic sentiment surprised her. This man, who many in town dismissed as simple because he couldn't speak, had depths few would ever know. "I'm glad you showed me who you truly are, Zach," she said quietly. "Most people never take the time to see beyond the surface." In response, he reached for her hand, holding it gently in his much larger one. The touch was simple but profound, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. They stood that way for several minutes, neither speaking, both understanding that something significant had shifted between them. The magic of the moment was broken when Mayor Thornton called from the doorway, "Miss Jenkins, Mrs. Thornton is ready to depart." Zach released her hand reluctantly. Before she turned to go, he quickly wrote, "May I call on you properly? Sunday after church." Catherine's heart leaped. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that very much." Sunday morning, Catherine sat in the small church beside Mrs. Thornton, trying to focus on Reverend Wallace's sermon rather than watching the door. The Kellers weren't regular churchgoers, and she didn't know if Zach would attend the service before calling on her. Just as the Reverend was building to his main point, the door opened and Zach slipped in quietly, taking a seat at the back. He wore a clean black coat, his hair neatly combed, and though he looked somewhat uncomfortable, his presence spoke volumes. After the service, as congregants mingled outside, Zach approached Catherine, nodding politely to those nearby. "Good morning, Mr. Keller," she greeted him formally, aware of curious eyes. "I'm glad you could join us today." He nodded, then presented her with a small bunch of late-season wildflowers tied with a simple ribbon. "Thank you," she said, touched by the gesture. "They're lovely." Mayor Thornton approached, eyeing the flowers with interest. "Will you be joining us for Sunday dinner, Mr. Keller?" Zach looked to Catherine, who answered, "Mr. Keller and I were planning to take a walk, if that's acceptable." Of course," the mayor said, though his expression suggested he'd have questions later. "Just be back by 3 for dinner, Miss Jenkins." With the mayor's reluctant blessing, Catherine and Zach set off down the main street, walking at a comfortable pace. When they reached the edge of town, away from prying eyes, Zach offered his arm, which Catherine took with a smile. "I was surprised to see you in church," she admitted. He took out his ever-present notebook, wanted to do this properly, court you respectably. The directness of his words made Catherine's breath catch. "Is that what you're doing, courting me?" His eyes held hers as he wrote, "If you'll allow it, I know I'm not what most women want." Catherine stopped walking, turning to face him. "And what do you think I want, Zach?" He hesitated, then wrote, "Someone educated, who can give you a comfortable life, who can speak to you." "What I want," Catherine said carefully, "is a man of character and kindness, intelligence and depth. Someone who sees me for who I am, not just as the town's schoolteacher." She touched the wildflowers he'd given her. "I believe I may have found him." The hope that dawned in his eyes was beautiful to behold. He wrote quickly, "I have little to offer beyond my heart and my hands." "Those are the things that matter most," Catherine replied softly. They walked to a small stream at the edge of town, sitting on a fallen log as Zach told her, through written words and occasional signs she was beginning to recognize about his life. He had lost his hearing and voice to scarlet fever at age 5. His mother had taught him to read and write, and a deaf peddler who passed through when Zach was 12 had taught him sign language. When his parents died 10 years ago, he and his brothers had built the North Star Ranch from nothing. Zach handled the finances and planning, Robert managed the cattle, and Matthew took care of equipment and supplies. Together, they had created a successful operation. "I've never tried to court a woman before," he confessed in writing. "Always seemed unfair to ask someone to accept half a man." "You are not half a man," Catherine said firmly. "You are more complete than most men I've known. You've simply found different ways to express yourself." Their Sunday walks became a regular occurrence, drawing considerable attention in Snowflake. Catherine found herself the subject of well-meaning but intrusive questions. "Such a shame about his affliction," Mrs. Peterson commented after church one Sunday. "You're very charitable to spend time with him, dear." "There's nothing charitable about it," Catherine replied coolly. "Mr. Keller is intelligent, kind, and excellent company." Sheriff Morgan was more direct. "You sure about this, Miss Jenkins? Keller's a good man, but life with him wouldn't be easy." "The best things rarely are, Sheriff," she answered. As December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and preparations for Christmas, Catherine and Zach's relationship deepened. He began teaching her sign language during their walks, his strong hands gently correcting her fingers when she made mistakes. At school, the children were rehearsing for the Christmas pageant. Zach attended every practice, helping build the simple sets and watching Catherine with undisguised admiration as she patiently directed the young performers. One afternoon, as a light snow fell rare in this part of Arizona, Zach invited Catherine to visit the ranch on Saturday. "Want to show you my home properly," he wrote, "if you're still considering us." "I'd love to see it," she said, her heart warming at his uncertainty. And Zach, "I am most definitely still considering us." Saturday dawned clear and cold. Zach arrived in town with a small sleigh pulled by 2 sturdy horses, the runners gliding smoothly over the light covering of snow. "This is wonderful," Catherine exclaimed as he helped her into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her. The journey to the ranch seemed shorter with the sleigh's speed, and Catherine enjoyed watching the landscape pass, occasional patches of snow brightening the winter browns and greens. Zach pointed out landmarks along the way, a distinctive rock formation, a grove of ancient junipers, the boundary line of North Star property. The ranch looked different in winter daylight, more established and impressive than Catherine had realized during her first visit. The main house was substantial, built of squared logs with a wide porch. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys and Christmas greenery decorated the door. Zach's sister-in-law, Sarah, greeted them warmly. "Welcome back, Miss Jenkins. We've been hoping Zach would bring you to visit again." Inside, the house was warm and inviting. A large Christmas tree stood in one corner of the main room, decorated with paper chains, carved wooden ornaments, and a few precious glass baubles. "The children made most of the decorations," Sarah explained. "They've learned so much since attending school." After a tour of the house, including a brief hello to Robert and Matthew, who were working in the barn, Zach led Catherine to a room she hadn't seen before, a small study lined with bookshelves. "My sanctuary," he wrote, "wanted you to see it." Catherine moved along the shelves in wonder. Classics by Dickens, Austen, and Twain sat alongside scientific texts, history volumes, and poetry collections. A desk by the window held papers covered in neat handwriting ranch accounts, Catherine realized all meticulously maintained. "This is wonderful, Zach," she said, turning to him. "You've built yourself a library to rival any in Boston." He looked pleased at her approval, then gestured to a chair by the fireplace, offering her a seat. Instead of sitting in the chair opposite, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His expression was serious, his blue eyes intent on hers. He released her hands to write in his notebook, taking more time than usual, clearly choosing his words with care. I know we've known each other only a short time. I know there are challenges, but I've never met anyone like you, Catherine. You see me as a whole person. You bring light to my silent world. I can offer you my heart, my home, my life. Would you consider becoming my wife? Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she read his proposal. The directness of his written words, lacking any flowery language or pretense, touched her deeply. Oh, Zach, she whispered. Are you certain? There will be talk in town. People may not understand. He wrote again, let them talk. I only care what you think. Catherine looked into his earnest face, realizing that somewhere between literary discussions and sign language lessons, she had fallen completely in love with this remarkable man. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. Yes, I will marry you, Zachariah Keller. Joy transformed his face. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative at first, then deepening as Catherine wound her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him against her. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Zach reached for his notebook again, when Catherine laughed at his eagerness. We should wait until spring, at least. Give the town time to adjust to the idea, and give me time to find someone to take over the school. His face fell slightly and he wrote, You'll stop teaching? Not entirely, she explained. But I can't live here and teach in town. Perhaps I could teach part-time or tutor children from nearby ranches. Zach considered this, then wrote, We could build a small schoolroom here for you. For neighboring children, too. The thoughtfulness of this suggestion that he would create space for her passion in his home confirmed for Catherine that she had made the right decision. That would be perfect, she said, kissing him again. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Snowflake, met with reactions ranging from genuine happiness to poorly concealed concern. Mayor Thornton took Catherine aside the day after her announcement, his expression troubled. Miss Jenkins, I hope you've considered the practical aspects of this union. Mr. Keller's condition presents unique challenges. His condition, as you call it, doesn't prevent him from running a successful ranch, reading literature I've only just discovered, or expressing himself more clearly than most men manage with endless words, Catherine replied firmly. I appreciate your concern, but I've made my decision. The children's reactions were far simpler. When Catherine announced that after the spring term she would be marrying the Keller children's uncle and moving to North Star Ranch, Eliza clapped her hands in delight. Does that mean you'll be our aunt? She asked excitedly. Yes, it does, Catherine confirmed, smiling. Good, Thomas declared. Uncle Zach smiles a lot more since he started courting you. Christmas arrived with a community celebration at the church. Catherine and Zach sat together openly now, his hand occasionally finding hers during the service. For her gift, he had crafted a beautiful wooden lap desk with compartments for paper, pens, and books perfect for her to use while teaching at the ranch. Catherine had found an antique pocket watch in the mercantile, its case engraved with stars. Inside, she had added an inscription. Words are not the only way to speak of love. When he opened it, his eyes shone with emotion. Before all the assembled townspeople, he signed, I love you to Catherine, a gesture she now recognized and returned without hesitation. Winter passed in a flurry of wedding preparations, school activities, and increasingly bold courtship. By March, Zach was regularly escorting Catherine to dinner at the homes of his brothers, and she had introduced him to her Eastern friends through letters that described his intelligence, kindness, and the deep connection they shared. Her parents' response had been predictably concerned at first, but Catherine's passionate defense of her choice eventually won their reluctant blessing. At the ranch, construction began on a small schoolhouse adjacent to the main home, a wedding gift from Zach to his bride. It would have windows facing east to catch the morning light, bookshelves built into the walls, and desks for up to 12 students. As April brought the first wildflowers, Catherine found herself walking with Zach along the stream where they had first begun to share their hearts. One more month, she said, watching the water flow over stones. Are you nervous? He shook his head, writing, only impatient, have waited my whole life for you. Was it worth the wait? She teased gently. His answer was to pull her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not. Their wedding took place on the first Saturday in May, with wildflowers decorating the small church and sunlight streaming through the windows. Catherine wore a gown of ivory silk, ordered from a shop in Phoenix, with a crown of spring blossoms in her hair. Zach waited at the altar in a new black suit, his brothers standing beside him as his best men. When Catherine appeared at the church door on Mayor Thornton's arm, her father being too ill to make the journey from Boston, Zach's face reflected such joy that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. Reverend Wallace had worked with the couple to create a ceremony that accommodated Zach's silence. For his vows, Zach had written his promises, which his brother Robert read aloud while Zach signed them to Catherine, who now understood enough sign language to follow his meaning. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Zach swept Catherine into a kiss that caused a few gasps from the more conservative members of the congregation and appreciative chuckles from the rest. The celebration afterward at the town hall was the social event of the year in Snowflake. Everyone attended, even those who had expressed doubts about the match. Seeing the obvious love between the new couple, many began to reconsider their assumptions about what made a successful marriage. As evening fell and the dancing continued, Zach led Catherine outside to the same spot where they had stood after the Thanksgiving celebration. Happy, he wrote simply. Completely, she assured him, leaning against his strong shoulder. And you? His answer was to take her hand and place it over his heart, its steady beating speaking a language they both understood perfectly. Their first months of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Catherine moved her belongings to the ranch, creating a home that blended her Eastern refinement with the practical beauty of Western living. The small schoolhouse was completed by late June, ready for summer lessons for the Keller children and several others from neighboring ranches. Zach continued to run the ranch with his brothers, but now he returned each day to Catherine. Their evenings spent reading together, learning more sign language, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. Their physical relationship had blossomed naturally, their bodies communicating what words sometimes could not. Catherine discovered that Zach's inability to speak had heightened his other senses. His touch was exquisitely attuned to her responses, his eyes reading her desires before she could voice them. By autumn, Catherine had news to share. One evening as they sat by the fire, she took Zach's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. His eyes widened in question, hope dawning in their blue depths. Yes, she confirmed, smiling through happy tears. In spring we'll have a baby. His joy was boundless. He lifted her in a gentle embrace, then signed rapidly, his fingers forming words of love, gratitude, and wonder. Later he wrote in the journal they now kept together, I once believed my silence was a prison. Now I know it led me to you. Our child will have both worlds, your voice and my hands, and will be richer for it. Word of the coming baby spread quickly through Snowflake and the surrounding ranches. The town that had once questioned their match now celebrated their happiness, with women stopping by the ranch to offer advice and bring handmade baby clothes. Catherine continued teaching through the winter, though she reduced her hours as spring approached. Her students, now including children from 3 neighboring ranches as well as the Keller children, thrived in the small schoolhouse Zach had built for her. In late April 1887, as the wildflowers once again carpeted the hills around North Star Ranch, Catherine gave birth to a son they named William Robert Keller. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. From the beginning, Zach was an attentive father, holding his son with confident hands that had once hesitated to reach for Catherine. Together, they taught William both spoken and signed language from his earliest days. One evening, as Catherine nursed William in the rocking chair Zach had crafted, she looked up to find her husband watching them with such love it nearly overwhelmed her. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. He signed, then wrote in their journal, thinking how one brave journey changed everything. You crossed a continent, I crossed the silence. Both led here. I would cross oceans for what we've found, Catherine whispered, reaching for his hand. In the years that followed, the Keller story became something of a legend in Snowflake and beyond. The schoolteacher who saw beyond silence and the cowboy who could only sign his name but offered his heart built a life that inspired others to look beyond appearances and listen with more than their ears. Their school grew to accommodate 20 students, with Catherine eventually training assistant teachers. Zach's innovative ranching methods made North Star one of the most successful operations in the territory. Their family expanded to include a daughter, Elizabeth Sarah, born 2 years after William, and later another son, James Thomas. All their children grew up fluent in both spoken and sign language, bridging the worlds their parents had united. And in the evenings, the family would often gather on the porch of their expanded home, watching the stars appear over the white mountains, each point of light a silent reminder that the most profound communications often require no sound at all. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zach presented Catherine with a gift, a small book he had written and had privately printed in Phoenix. Titled Signs of Love, it contained the story of their courtship and marriage, illustrated with drawings of the sign language that had become their shared vocabulary. The final page held words that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "When I was a boy, I believed my silence was my greatest weakness. You showed me it was my strength. You looked beyond what I lacked to see what I offered. In your eyes, I found my voice. In your heart, I found my home. And in our children, I see the future I never dared to dream of. I may not speak with my voice, but with my hands and heart, I will tell you I love you every day for the rest of our lives." "And I will always listen," Catherine promised, signing the words as she spoke them. Their languages intertwined just as their lives had become a testament to the power of love to transcend all barriers, including silence.